The National Survey of Student Engagement is a survey that, among other things, asked first-year students at liberal arts colleges how much time they spend preparing for class each week. The results from the 2007 survey are summarized below. Approximate the mean number of hours spent preparing for class each week. First, we need to determine whether the data represents a sample or a population. Although the problem does not explicitly state that the data represents a sample, we can determine that because only a few college students were surveyed and not all of them, that this represents a sample. So because we are approximating a sample mean, we use the following formula. This is the formula to approximate the sample mean from grouped data. So here we have xi and fi, where xi represents the class midpoint. So here for the group data, we have 130 between 1 and 5. So we basically have to think about what would be the best number to come up with to represent all of them because we don't have the raw data. So the midpoint or the number in the middle is going to be the best number to represent these 130 data values. So we multiply each of the midpoints times the frequency and then add them all together and then divide by the total number of frequencies. So this is kind of like doing the mean from before. So instead of adding whatever this number is 130 times, we can just multiply these two together and we're accounting for whatever this number is 130 times. Then because we're multiplying this one by 250 times, then it's like adding whatever this number would be 250 times, so on and so forth. And then we divide by the total frequency. So to use the formula, it makes it a lot easier to use the table to organize all of your information. First, we will write in all the classes for time. Now let's write the corresponding frequencies. Now we need to determine the class midpoints. We find the midpoints by taking the lower class limit of the current class, adding the lower class limit of the next class, and dividing by 2. If the data value is not a class, you just take the data value. So for 0, we only have 0, so the class midpoint will be 0. Now let's find the class midpoint for the class from 1 through 5. We need to add 1 plus 6 and then divide by 2. Type this in your calculator and you should get 3.5. To determine the class midpoint for 6 through 10, we add 6 plus 11 and then divide by 2. And this is 8.5. Now let's find the class midpoint for the class of 11 through 15. We add 11 plus 16 and divide by 2. To find the class midpoint for the class of 31 through 35, remember that we need the next lower class limit. So if this data continued, the next class would be 36 through 40. So we create a new class. Now to determine the midpoint, we add the two lower class limits, and this is 31 plus 36 divided by 2, which is 33.5. Remember that the class midpoints are the xi's in the formula, and the frequencies are the fi's. Now let's fill in the xi-fi column. Xi is the class midpoint, and we will multiply that by the frequency, or fi. First, we multiply 0 times 0, which is 0. Next, we have 130 times 3.5, and we get 455. Next, we multiply 250 with 8.5, and we get 2,125. Now let's finish finding the rest of the values. Now let's find the sum of the xi-fi column, and this is 14,750. And now let's add up all of the frequencies, and we get 1,000. 14,750 represents the sum of the xi-fi's, and 1,000 represents the sum of all the fi's. Now we divide 14,750 by 1,000, and we get 14.75. Let's approximate the sample mean for this grouped data. First, typed in your group data, we have a column for hours and a column for frequency. Now you need to add an additional class for hours. If the class is continued, the next class would be 36 through 40. We don't have any data values in this class, so the frequency will be 0. You need to add this extra row, otherwise you will not get the correct answer. Now let's go to Stat, Summary Stats, and then Group/Bin Data. For the bins in, you will select var1 or the number of hours, and for counts in, you will select the frequency or var2. Here where it says midpoints defined by the average of, you need to select consecutive lower limits. If you choose limits, you will get the wrong answer, so make sure that you always choose consecutive lower limits for grouped or bin data. Now we want the mean, so let's just click on mean, and now let's press compute. And we get 14.75.